Hello economics students, so today we're going to be talking about merit goods and market failure. This is a very topical subject, of course, recently because the vaccine is widely considered to be a merit good. So today we're going to be having a look at how merit goods function and why it's considered a market failure. So by the end of this lesson, you will be able to understand market failure as a failure to allocate resources efficiently. You'll be able to understand the meaning of externalities. You'll be able to use diagrams to show how merit goods and their positive externalities or external benefits of production and consumption affect society. You'll be able to understand what policies can be used to correct these market failures and how they can be evaluated in a more general way using a mnemonic device. And at the end, I'll use a little bit of time to explain information asymmetry and monopolies as other forms of market failure. So, first, I would like you to look at these pictures. We've got libraries, education, dentistry, museums, sports centres and broadband. I would like you to quickly write down why you think or why these places are widely considered to be good for society. Okay, pause the video and write down some notes. Okay, now I would like you to think about whether the government should provide or subsidise these services all to the same extent. Or, indeed, should they subsidise or provide these goods at all? Should it be left to the free markets? Okay, pause the video and write down an answer. Okay, so the answers to that will be so wide. So many students will have many different answers to that question, and it's based on your own political beliefs. And it's not my job to say whether those political beliefs are good or bad, but it's important to understand the arguments for both sides. And of course, I'd like you to consider this idea of public goods. Should these things be free for everyone? Now, the reason I put the broadband communism picture in the bottom right there is because that's been in the news a lot recently with whether or not broadband should be provided or some form of internet, wireless internet, should be provided free of charge for the whole population. Okay, so today I would like to explain the theory behind positive externalities of merit goods. Now, from that little activity, you'll have a probably decent understanding of the kind of external benefits of certain goods or certain places, certain pieces of infrastructure. So there's a simple formula that you can use in your essays to analyse these externalities, and it's below. So private benefits are the benefits to the individual consumers or the firms in their economic activity. So this is the benefits to the first parties, the individuals. Okay, then there's external benefits. Now that's benefits to others or individual consumers or firms in that economic activity. So the third parties are not involved, but they benefit from the actions of the first parties. Okay? And if you add those together, you get social benefits, which is the total benefits to society of a given economic activity. And that's where everyone benefits as a result of the consumption or production of merit goods. So we could show this on a diagram using the ecotourism industry. Now, the ecotourism industry has boomed around the world in many different countries around the world, with many people going to mountain areas for mountain trekking, people going diving to observe the wide diversity of ocean life and sea life, and people going to beaches, beach holidays, which then have to be cleaned to remain a tourist destination, and many other types of industry. So there's also like rainforests being sectioned off so that people can visit there as tourists, and this would be an example of an ecotourism industry. Now, the existence of positive production externalities can be illustrated as a market in which the private cost of production is greater than the marginal social costs of production. So in this case, the free market will provide a quantity of goods which is less than the socially optimal quantity. Now, that's an absolutely key sentence, because if you look at the diagram, the socially optimal quantity is greater than the quantity provided in the free market. So socially optimal is the best for society, and the quantity equilibrium is the QE is the quantity provided when there's no government intervention. So in this case, resources are under allocated towards the ecotourism industry. Okay, so in this market, operating a business, of course, in this industry is very expensive, especially initially. So the MPC is relatively high. There are external benefits of operating an ecotourism business, which are reflected in MSC. The price equilibrium price is higher than what it would be socially optimally. The quantity demanded would be greater for ecotourism if the price was lower, and the equilibrium quantity QE is less than what the socially optimal quantity is, the QSO. So society would be much better off in general by offering more ecotourism services. Now, I've been to many places diving, and many of these places used to be fishing towns where the residents of the town would be completely reliant on revenue from fishing boats. Now, over the last few years, they've noticed that there is much greater profits to be earned through allowing tourists to come and dive in those spots, and it also helps the fish populations which increase as a result due to lack of fishing. So it's a really interesting business model that's transformed over the last few years, certainly for the better. So we'll look at this diagram in a little bit more detail. Because not enough ecotourism services will be provided by the free market, if you have a look at that grey square, that represents the total potential welfare gain to society. If a greater quantity of this merit goods was provided and consumed, society as a whole would be better off. Again, another example would be national parks in the USA or in the UK. Lots of places are being protected to encourage ecotourism. And as a third-party benefit of that, the environment becomes better, air pollution is reduced, and the quality of life of people who live in those communities are also improved. So, back to the diagram. So society gains the amount of welfare equal to this grey triangle, and that's really important to point out in your essays, as it's A-star 7-level evaluation, as it clearly shows that the marginal social benefits are greater than the marginal social costs in this market. Okay? So the price, PE, is too high, and therefore the equilibrium quantity, QE, is too low. So an increase of provision of merit goods would benefit everyone. Now, really emphasize that in your essays. It's a really interesting concept, and the diagram shows it perfectly. So don't forget to talk about the axes, and don't forget to talk about QSO, QE, PSO, and PE. So many students forget to do this, and it takes you down a lot of marks just by omitting a description of the diagram. So next we'll look at positive externalities of consumption. A positive externality of consumption exists if the consumption of that good or service provides spillover benefits to a third party not involved in this market. So let's think about education. Getting an education has private benefits for you all. Okay? It has many benefits for the students, such as better job opportunities, higher pay, earlier retirement, better travel opportunities, just better quality of life in general. However, society recognises that education is important for society as a whole. This is why it's often provided by governments free of charge. Okay, so the positive externalities of education include, and this has been proven again and again, an educated citizen will be more productive in the course of his or her life. They'll contribute more to national output. They will also pay more in taxes, which can go towards providing benefits and more public goods for everyone in society, even those without education. And he or she is more likely to become a business owner and offer employment opportunities to other in society which may not otherwise have been provided. So the benefits ripple out in society for investment in education. So education, again, key sentence in red there. Education is a merit good which provides spillover benefits to society as a whole. So let's have a look at this in diagram form. Now remember, when you're talking about consumption, it's the demand line you're talking about. When you're talking about production, it's the supply line. So, in this case, the marginal social benefits, MSB, on the diagram, is greater than the marginal private benefit of receiving an education. If left to the free market, too few people will receive the highest levels of education. It's quite simply because most people would not be able to afford to go to university or primary school or high school if it was left completely to the free market. Okay? There would be, of course, education, but it wouldn't reach everyone. So it wouldn't be at the socially optimal quantity of education consumed. Now you could sort of debate about how much education is the socially optimal quantity. Should everyone have a degree? Should everyone be at school until the age of 18? These ideas change over time and they're often debated on. Should the leaving school age become 18 rather than 16 in the UK? So within this diagram, the private demand for education is equal to the marginal private benefit. The quantity of education society will consume if it's left entirely to the free market is QE. Once again, it's less than the socially optimal. Okay? Make sure you get that correct in your essays. There are massive benefits of receiving an education to the whole of society, and this is represented as the vertical distance between marginal private benefit and the marginal social benefit. So, anytime the free market provides too little, again a recap of a good or service, there's potential gain in total welfare of the good being produced at greater quantity. So we can see right there the potential welfare gain of education. Okay, there is the grey triangle again, showing welfare gain. A key tip here is, always remember, if the arrow or the triangle is pointing towards the positive, it is a positive externality. If it's pointing towards the negative, it's a negative externality. It's a key tip there. So if you're ever thinking, where should I put the triangle that shows welfare gain or welfare loss, just remember that tip. Positive externalities point to the positive. Negative externalities point to the negative. Okay, so as we described, the marginal social benefit of education is greater than the marginal social cost, indicating that not enough education is being provided. At the socially optimal quantity, QSO, the marginal social benefits equal the marginal social cost, indicating that this is the allocatively efficient level of education to provide. If demand were greater, the price would be higher, and more institutions would provide education and increase the quantity supplied. So once again, in red, increased provision of merit goods like education benefits society as a whole. So this is the justification behind having state schools and having tuition fees paid for, and for having colleges, all those different technical colleges, all these kind of things, and free education for older people. So, the government response to positive externalities. When the market fails by underallocating resources towards the production or consumption of a good, society stands to benefit from increasing the production and consumption of this good. So the government can use policies aimed at increasing either the supply or the demand for the goods, and can improve efficiency in this market. Such policies could include corrective subsidies to producers. A subsidy is a payment from government direct to producers. Subsidies lower the marginal private costs of production. It will increase supply, reducing the price, and increase the quantity demanded of the goods being subsidised. You could give subsidies to consumers, directly to consumers, like education grants, for example. A subsidy to consumers of a good will increase the marginal private benefit of consumption, since individuals now get paid to buy a good, and increase the demand for the goods. The higher the price incentivises firms to provide a greater quantity, resulting in a more efficient allocation of resources towards this good. This can also be seen in soft loans for university students. So university students are encouraged to take out loans to attend university, and therefore universities will provide more spaces for students. Okay, next, government provision. Many merit goods are provided directly by the governments, such as education, as we talked about, healthcare, infrastructure, like bridges, airports, police security. All of these kind of things are provided directly by the government, because quite simply, the free market would not produce those goods to the socially optimal quantity. Can you imagine if the fire service was privatised and you had to pay to put a fire out in your building? It just doesn't quite work. Same with national defence. How on earth could you have a system of national defence without government provision? There's just simply no profit incentive. Okay, and finally, positive advertising. Governments can educate consumers about the private costs and the positive benefits of a good, and that may increase the demand for the goods, incentivizing firms to produce more of it. There's very successful campaigns related to healthy eating campaigns, safe sex campaigns from the 80s onwards. There was promoting flu shots and other vaccines, and so on and so on. So the government provides advertising to consumers and encourage their behaviour. You can see this also with the COVID pandemic and the encouragement of consumers to wear masks everywhere. Masks, of course, is a merit good, and recent calculations showed that although one mask is costs maybe 5 pence or something, the value of that mask is £50, which really shows the value to society of a merit good, but many, many, many times the costs to produce it. Okay, so we'll have a look at the diagrams side by side. Corrective subsidies towards positive externalities and merit goods. So a subsidy to producers reduces the marginal cost of production and increases the supply of the good being subsidised. You can see this on both diagrams. In the markets below, the government is subsidising ecotourism providers and private schools. Both these subsidies lead to a greater equilibrium quantity, and that's why I keep saying focus on the quantity at a lower equilibrium price and an increase in welfare to society. So you can see now in both diagrams the supply has moved towards the Q socially optimal. So that's how subsidies work. Now remember this diagram and use it well in your essays. So more generally, because we have no idea what type of good would come up in the exam, there's so many different choices the examiners have with merit goods. But a good rule of thumb and a good plan to evaluate the solution to positive externalities of consumption and production and subsidies associated with that is to use the mnemonic device of TACOs. Okay? It doesn't, one of the letters may not work for a particular policy, but others may. So just keep that in mind as you're writing your essay. It's a really good way to start paragraphs and really to get your brain thinking about how to evaluate a policy on the spot. Right, so T stands for time. Examiners love when students talk about the short run and the long run consequences of a policy. How quickly will this policy have an effect on society? Now, if it's education and subsidies, it will take a long time before you see any increase in productivity of the general population as a result of that subsidy. So it may not be politically acceptable to introduce new subsidies, because by the time it has a positive effect on the economy, another politician will claim they are the ones who introduced the policy and they are the reason for its success. Okay, so next we've got allocation. Now think about that, like where do you direct the policy? Now it's not even just geographically, which of course is another point. Like if it's a road or if it's a railway, of course those goods have massive positive externalities. Where do you build it? Where's the best place for society to build those railways, to build those motorways, to protect nature, to create a national park, where is the best place? And where is the... And it's often very difficult to know where it is. Where would be the best use of that money? Where would the best place be to protect national forests, beaches, etc.? Okay, and then there's another one. It's like even if I say education, now a key policy of Tony Blair was education, in education, education. Like that was his slogan, and very effective slogan at the time. He promised massive increase in investment in education, but where in education? Education is massive. It's such a huge sector. You've got preschool, you've got kindergartens, you've got nurseries, you've got primary school, you've got high school, you've got universities. Where should you put the money, right? And then even within that, think about that. If you say high schools, where does it go in high schools? Are you going to increase the pay for teachers? Are you going to give every teacher a fancy new laptop? Are you going to give them interactive whiteboards? Where does the money go? Or does it go to smaller class sizes? So all these kind of things are allocation issues, and they're very difficult to get around because the economy is so complex. It's just not enough to say we're going to invest in education. That money has to be very effectively managed within different sectors. Same with healthcare. Where do you put it in healthcare? Which type of hospital? Do you want to build these super hospitals? Do you want to invest in old age care? All this kind of thing. Do you want to invest in GP surgeries? Again, investing in the NHS doesn't mean anything. There has to be very effective management of funds to find out where it would be socially optimal to invest. Okay, that leads us to our next one, is calculations. Very, very difficult to very, very easy, I should say, to overshoot or undershoot budgets. How much do you spend on it? How much is the socially optimal amount of money you are going to invest? Is the Edinburgh tram, is the tram system, is it worth the amount of money that we've put into it? Was that too much? Or have they not invested enough? Okay, same with, you could apply that to education. How much do you put in? It's always a debate, like police service as well. Some groups want much more spending, other groups want less spending. Same with national defence. Do you want more or less? It's constantly in the news. That's essentially the job of governments. Okay, and then you've also got massive opportunity costs. If the government is spending more in one area, it either means you're increasing taxes or you're cutting from another area of the budget. Okay, so there's always an opportunity cost with any government intervention. And then finally, if you consider the stakeholders, are they affected equally? Are governments affected equally? Are businesses affected equally? Customers and the public as a whole? Okay, so those key words: time, allocation, calculation, opportunity costs, and stakeholders. Absolutely key to getting a good mark in an essay. There you've got 5 paragraphs of excellent evaluation that you can quickly and efficiently use in an exam. So remember that. Tacos. Okay, so that's the merit goods done. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about public goods, which is very much related to merit goods. Because why would you provide for free a demerit goods or a good that creates negative externalities? You just wouldn't. So many merit goods are public goods, and that's why those diagrams, you can use those diagrams for merit goods to describe public goods. So if a free market produces none of this good, a good which isn't provided in the free market at all but should be, is known as a public good. My favourite example of this is Central Park. If you left Central Park in New York, or there's one in Tokyo, it's very similar, massive park in the centre of the city. If you left it to the free market, there would be buildings across the park. So therefore there'd be no park. So the park has to be protected, provided by the government, and then it gives everyone a benefit from the existence of that park. Public benches, another example of that as well. Okay, and in the UK, museums, or some museums, are still public goods where it's free to enter as it benefits society as a whole. So there's some key concerns here with public goods. So a good which provides benefits to society which are non-rivalrous and the benefits of which are non-excludable is the key definition. Now, to explain that, a non-rivalrous good of consumption means that one consumer's enjoyment of the benefits of the good does not diminishing any other consumer's enjoyment of its benefit. Okay, it's also non-excludable. This means that once the good has been provided, it's not possible to exclude any individuals from enjoying the benefits. Okay, in other words, you can't make individuals pay for the good once it's made available to everyone. There will be free riders or individuals who enjoy the goods benefits without ever paying for it, and that's always going to be a criticism of providing public goods. Okay, so lots of examples here to have a look through. All we have to do really to find public goods is to open your front door. They're everywhere. It's one of these things that it's so commonplace that we often don't even notice or consider that they are provided or have been provided in the past by the government. So infrastructure, roads, sidewalks, streetlights, power lines, sewage systems, train tracks, all of these are non-excludable and non-rivalrous. They can't be, quite simply. Therefore, they are unlikely to be provided by the free market. The government must provide these goods so that society can enjoy the benefits. Okay, parks. Last time you walked through a public park, did you pay to get in? If not, then it's non-excludable. Did your enjoyment of the park prevent others from enjoying it? If not, then it was non-rivalrous. Public parks are an example of public goods. Just when I was reading that question, did your enjoyment of the park prevent others from enjoying it? Of course there's going to be people who diminish the benefit of public parks or public beaches for others by playing loud music, being obnoxious, being annoying, and then irritating and becoming a cost to a third party. The next one, fire and police protection. If your house catches on fire, do you have to call a private firefighting firm? Obviously not. The reason that you don't is because fire protection is non-rivalrous. If your house went on fire, there's a good chance it would spread to others and it would get out of control. Look at the Great Fire of London before any public fire fighting service. You just simply, in a modern society, you have to have some form of fire protection. And again, same with police, ambulances. The benefits of police protection are non-rivalrous and non-excludable. And finally, of course, national defence, army, navy, air force provides citizens with protection, which once provided, individuals within the nation cannot be excluded from benefiting from. One person's safety does not diminishing another's, so defence is non-excludable and non-rivalrous. Okay, so our next little point is information asymmetry, which is another example of a market failure, a lesser known one. You'd get less questions about this, but it still is a really important market failure, and it's the reason why many of the negative externalities exist. So there's a quick cartoon there. I'm sorry, but when you took out this policy, you never specified that it was a mobile home about a turtle, right? So in other words, the turtle has signed an insurance policy and he cannot get a payment on that insurance policy because he was somehow misled by the beaver. Okay, so a quick rundown of asymmetric information. When a seller of the product knows something about it which is not revealed to the buyer, that is an example of asymmetric information. Now, the tobacco industry tried to suppress the negative health costs of smoking tobacco for years, for decades. The health concerns about tobacco have been known for many years. But it was only fairly recently that governments managed to step in and try and prevent the overconsumption of tobacco. There's so many different examples of this as well. So, firstly, without perfect knowledge, buyers may not buy the optimal quantity of the product. They may overconsume. Same with sugar. A lot of people don't realise that they're consuming sugar, and then they may overconsume. Like, for example, fruit juice. So we've got normally a lot of added sugar, and a lot of people overdrink fruit juice thinking that it's healthy. I remember when I was young, Sunny D was sold as a healthy drink, which if you tasted it, it's clearly not. But many people believed it to be so and overconsumed Sunny Delight. I think Coca-Cola used to be sold as a hangover cure and something beneficial to one's health. So anyway, without all the information about a product, the marginal private benefit may be greater than the marginal social benefit, again creating external costs to society. A famous one recently, actually there's two famous ones, comparethemarket.com were fined I think nearly £20 million because they missold insurance to consumers who thought that they were buying the cheapest insurance on the market. It turned out not to be the case. Equally, Volkswagen faced a $2.8 billion criminal fine for rigging diesel-powered vehicles to cheat on the government emissions tests. So essentially encouraging the overconsumption of diesel-powered vehicles by consumers and then not having to pay the penalties on that. And they were relying on a system of asymmetric information that no one would understand the emissions test or how it works. So there's two types of information asymmetry. There's adverse selection, which is typical in the market for insurance. If the buyer of insurance doesn't share with the insurer complete information about the risk he or she presents, insurance will be provided at too low a cost to many risky individuals. I think there's some studies about if you are purchasing a rental car and you buy the most expensive insurance, you're more likely to have an accident because you take less care. Whereas if you have quite a strict policy on the car, I remember driving around Iceland and the penalty for any kind of damage on the car was massive. So I was extremely careful when I was driving around, made sure I didn't go off roads or anything. So the cost of covering the dishonest are thereby shared by the more honest consumers for who the insurance premiums are higher than they would have been otherwise. So healthcare insurance is often expensive for part of this reason. Okay, and then finally we've got moral hazards, which is another type of information asymmetry. If the consequences of one's actions are borne in society as a whole or by a third party, he or she is more likely to take risky actions than he would have done if they're fully borne by himself. For example, if you've got a rental car, as I said, with full insurance, you're more likely to drive recklessly than if you have a high copay, as I said. So adverse selection, moral hazard, very overlapping, but very interesting types of asymmetry. Okay, so there's a little bit about the financial crisis as a market failure. So if you want to pause it there and then just read through this, essentially the financial crisis was very much a type of market failure, as asymmetry, as consumers often believed and investors believed that house prices would always rise. So pause it here and have a wee read through that little article. Okay, so now we've got our final market failure, which is about monopolies and the abuse of monopoly power. Now, when I show you the diagram, it will become quite obvious why a monopoly is a market failure. So, when a single firm controls a large stereoscopic market, that firm now has an incentive to charge a higher price to gain abnormal profits and produce a lower quantity than what would be socially optimal. So the source of a monopoly power arises from a firm's price-making abilities. In more competitive markets, perfect competition, hundreds of small firms compete with another for the business of consumers. Competition forces firms to produce their goods efficiently and at lower cost and sell their goods for a low price. Without competition, monopolists are not forced to produce at the lowest cost, nor do they have to sell for the lowest price because they are the only supplier. So monopolists are both productively and allocatively inefficient because without competition, firms are able to charge higher prices for smaller quantities. Now you can show this on a diagram. So a competitive market has an equilibrium and there's no market failure within the perfectly competitive market in this case. So you can see quite clearly on the diagram on the right, the monopolistic market, that they're charging a higher price and they're providing a lower quantity. In the competitive market, the price and quantity are always determined by the intersection of demand and supply, and therefore is considered to be allocatively efficient. A monopolist, however, will produce at the level based on its marginal revenue and marginal costs. Therefore, the monopolist will charge higher prices and provide a lower quantity. Now you can see that in the diagram. The socially optimal quantity, again, is much greater than the quantity provided by the monopoly. Now you can look at this, many different industries in this market, especially the pharmaceutical industry. So if you think about, let's say, epinephrine or the EpiPen is very cheap to produce, but the company that produces it, Mylan, increases the price for healthcare systems such as the NHS and healthcare systems around the world, and they increase the price by hundreds and hundreds of percent. So there's less quantity available for consumers because, of course, healthcare systems have huge opportunity costs for purchasing EpiPens. And it leads to sort of market failures elsewhere. You know, the third-party side effects again. If you're spending more money on EpiPens, then you're spending less money on other medicines, other types of medicine. So, resources are, here's the key sentence again, resources are under-allocated towards a monopolist's output. Therefore, the monopoly can be considered a market failure. Okay. So that's a quick rundown of some of the key market failures, particularly merit goods, and the evaluation of the policies to correct that market failure. So hopefully you got a lot from that. I think you should be ready to answer a question. Again, keep practicing the diagrams, practice explaining the axes, practice explaining the curves, and you should be all right. And use the diagram to evaluate the situation or the policy. Absolutely critical to getting a 7 or an A star. Okay, thank you very much.